All right, so let's talk about new media and the challenges in curating that we faced. But first of all, the recognition. So the Header Footer Gallery is part of the New Media Caucus and is dedicated to promoting the creative output of our members by situating their work in thoughtfully curated exhibitions that take place across our entire web presence. New Media Caucus is an international nonprofit association formed to promote the development and understanding of new media art. We represent and serve artists, designers, practitioners, historians, theorists, educators, students, and scholars, recognizing new media art to be inherently interdisciplinary, multimodal, and evolving. We support and advance a wide range of inquiry to catalyze further evolution of the field. The New Media Caucus is committed to extending and sustaining the diversity of our community, board, and membership to promote an environment of equality, inclusion, and respect for difference. We prioritize inclusion as an ongoing collaborative process of growth that we continually address both within the caucus and in our field. Okay, so now that that's taken care of. So first of all, we're gonna use the Ammerman show, which I curated and which Nadav, who's our guest today, helped, well, he organized the whole thing. Nadav is the director of the Ammerman Center for Arts and Technology at Connecticut College. Hello, Nadav. And so I think the first thing I wanted to add is, well, you've been doing this before, like I was involved. This is what was the 17th edition of it?
I always get confused. Well, the symposium has been happening since the mid 80s. So it's been happening for 40 years almost. This is which edition of this is? Yes, it is the 17th biennial. We
Yeah.
basically missed a couple because of COVID.
All right. And you've been involved since when?
I've been involved since I came to Connecticut College, which was in 2012, in the summer of 2012. So basically, since then, our first biennial after I joined was 2014. So I've done one, two, three. This is my fourth one, essentially.
All right. And were you like in part of the curation of any of them?
Sure. Yeah. So why don't I back up for a second? I'll just say what the Ammerman Center
Oh
is
yeah, sure.
for those who don't know. But the Ammerman Center is a Center for Arts and Technology. It's an interdisciplinary center at a liberal arts college at Connecticut College, which is based in New London in Connecticut. And it's, I think, one of the longer running such centers in the country, which is especially unusual given that it's in a small liberal arts college. That was one of the reasons actually came to Connecticut College in the first place. And it's it's got a kind of very consistent long running kind of track record of organizing events around arts and technology. It was started by people coming from the areas of music and visual art, and then later on kind of got much more kind of interconnected with computer science and math and so on. And these days it's all over the place. It's got faculty and students kind of doing research and working on projects in really a whole range of fields, from like botany to art history or sociology, and of course computer science, visual art, dance, music, so on. So, and the symposium we've organized has always had the same approach of basically providing a kind of wide palette of the different arts and scholarship, and so both hands-on kind of practice-based exhibitions and performances and so on, but also conversations and talks and academic panels and that sort of thing. But the focus has shifted obviously over the years depending on who's involved, right? So there were a few decades where it was very heavily music focused and kind of computer music focused, and it became in a way kind of the flagship symposium for Shimus, which is the big kind of computer music organization in the US. And then it started shifting I would say around the time I got to the college, there was a change also in leadership, and we were trying to kind of just even out a bit the mix of the different arts, just create a bit more of a reputation for it, the reputation it already had in the computer music and new music kind of circles. We wanted to expand that and add a bit more involvement from all those other fields that I mentioned. So that was the direction. So part of that was and to also connect it more with the local community. So I started curating the visual art, the kind of exhibition side of it, not just visual art, but basically anything that you can show in an exhibition from 2014. So I did 2014, 16, and 18. We've done all three of those. We've done in a gallery that's in New London, actually, that's not at the college. And that was part of the idea that New London is the city that the college is a part of, is a resident of, but it's, as these colleges are, it's kind of separate. It's kind of like literally on a hill above the city. So the idea was to create a bit more involvement that way and to curate it in a local artist-run gallery space. And we've done that a few times. And there were a whole bunch of other shows and kind of satellite exhibits, big feature artist exhibit, and so on that we would still also curate on campus. So that's a really brief version.
So and this is the one thing, like, you are an artist, I think, first and foremost, right?
Yep.
So, and I'm going to spoil a little bit of what comes later in the program, but Harshini is an artist themselves. And I think I'm the only one here who's a straight up curator. And I think
Boo, become an artist.
I'm trying.
It's time to cross over to the dark side.
Yes.
I know. The drive is there, the skills not so much. And that's what I'm trying to fix. But going back to the whole thing, the one thing that people like, my claim to fame, if we can even call it that, is this manual about curating for new media art. And one of the things that when I wrote this thing was interaction is very, very complicated, right? And I think the Ammerman kind of beat that out of me, and I realized that video and audio can be just as complicated as interaction, if not even more so. I don't know, like, would you like to feed on that? How do you feel about this idea? Or if you even have like something that's like, no, this is even harder.
Yeah. Oh, well, I feel about that very strongly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, in my art practice, I'm a media artist mostly. So, I mean, there are sometimes objects or certainly physical elements in the installations I make or performances I make, but probably the bulk of the output is audiovisual. So I've always treated it really seriously. It has to do also with the kind of influences I had, even as an undergrad, and the kind of mentors I had and so on. I learned video in a school that also has a film school. So I would take a lot of also the film classes, and there's this level of seriousness that, both filmmakers and photographers put into production and presentation. Whereas then you turned around and you saw like video art displayed in a gallery, and it was like some like kind of crooked projector that's projecting this washed out thing in a hallway where everybody kind of passes by and you can't hear anything because it's coming from the projector speaker. And that was basically, at the time, certainly the early 2000s, that was like 95% of the shows featuring video. which was insane, because that we're talking even in big museums, right? We're not even talking just in, scrappy little galleries or whatnot. So that was also always super important to me too, basically, because it was obvious that just by doing a few simple things, you can completely transform people's experience of a piece, right? So if you're an installation artist, you always think of the space, right? That is kind of And that's, performance and installation is where I come from, and creating an experience, right? There's a lot of hype these days about like, recently was in a workshop with a couple artists that were great, but it was funny to me that their label was like, they're experiential artists. They said they're experiential and immersive artists. And I was like, doesn't that just mean installation artists? Or, it's like, it's the same thing, right? So there's kind of new hype words associated with it, but it's the same idea of thinking about people's complete experience in a space, and thinking about a video projection as that, I think, is super important, right? Is like, what does the space actually sound and feel like? Not just like I hung a projector, therefore people have magically the complete experience of the piece. That's not how it works.
Yeah. So here's a little plot twist. Harshini is a projection artist themselves. So Harshini, I don't know if you want to jump into this a little bit.
Yeah, I was laughing in the background. That's why I was like, you are muted. The sign on the Zoom, because it's so often that's the case that, I mean, like 9 out of 10 times people ask me for projections, and then I hear their idea, and they've either come in, at like the very end of a project, and suddenly they want a wow factor, and so they add projections, or they tell me their idea and it's totally, it's solid as is. You don't really need a visual element. Its focus is elsewhere, so why would you take the focus away from your intention? So 9 out of 10 times I say no to projection, because it's exactly that. It's like, we put projector, therefore there is magic and visuals in this, and it's not the case at all, right? You really need that strong intention. Does it really work with all of the elements? And I'm also coming from a theatrical background, so oftentimes people are like, projections in theater, of course, and it's like, no, you don't always need it. You can actually just forget about it. But yeah, I was like laughing in the background with everything you're saying, because it's totally really resonates with me.
Yeah. I mean, the flip side, there is a flip side to that, right? Which we have reached a point, or are kind of, I guess, 50%, in terms of tools, in terms of the software, at least, that these days it is very straightforward, right? To create really powerful, kind of convincing projections. Without like a ton of technical knowledge, right? You don't need the learning curve that you used to need to make that look halfway decent. Good example of that is we had a lot of turmoil on our campus recently. There were big demonstrations against the president, which just resigned yesterday, actually. So that's recent news as a result of that. And, we won't get into that, but part of the kind of way we addressed it, as faculty and students, right? So that's my third hat, right? As teacher, was I worked with my video installation students. They wanted, instead of the regular project, to do more of it, to be involved in the protests and to create a projection for that. So we did a super fast pivot, and normally we do a big projection mapping project, and it takes a lot of time because we build up to it because of everything we mentioned, right? That it takes a lot to create a convincing projection, but there are shortcuts. So we basically did a 1-day crash course on projection mapping, and for the purposes of a protest, right? Not for the purposes of a great artwork. They were able to whip something up super fast because there's this wonderful software called MadMapper, right? And there's similar software out there too that does similar things, but that lets you do video mapping very fast, which you use to basically custom make, right? So the first projection mapping projects I did, which were very early on, in terms of, in general, my, video career, that was like in 2006, I think. And there wasn't projection mapping software, that was available in that way. The term wasn't even used, right? So I just had to code something and, to make something. I used Max MSP. And it was very early days for like jitter for the video component of it. So it was kind of a pain in the butt, but it worked, it worked, but it was not out of the box, right? So there was a lot of technical kind of involvement. And then, the part that hasn't changed is the physical aspect of it too, right? There's like so many physical, considerations of space and sight and also meaning and so on that, if people don't pay attention to them, it becomes like exactly what Harshini said, right? This kind of plastering some video on it, which I can go into experiences around that.
Well, I'm talking about that. I like in this show we had 3 like straight up projection works, and then we also had like the little mini theater that we created for projecting video, and that in itself it's 4 projections. One of them very, very complicated with what was it, Peter Burr? Yeah, so that one we already like I already kind of sort of messed up in that one because of the way I was conceptualizing the space and how I was thinking, oh well, we have this whole wall, and then there was like a miscommunication between my understanding of it, and we ended up having to compromise a little bit on the vision of the artist in terms of the width of the walls and all that. But so that already was a big challenge. Then we had James' piece was 3 short throw projectors, super short throw projectors. That was sort of its own challenges. And then the last one, which was the one that was like, I think the more challenging one for you, Nada, because it was Denise's work, which we were just throwing in the middle of the gallery space without like perfect darkness. And I think in that one, Denise and I were very clear that we wanted something ghostly, and we didn't care particularly about like the crispness of the video. But I remember you wanting it to be like super well, and I think that was a little bit of your background coming through of like wanting your perfect projections and all that. And that was a challenge getting that one to work, because I had never done like the masking that they wanted to do, and we're like trying to solve it within the feed, and you're like, just throw gaffer tape on it, and it's like and it was like, okay, and it worked really well. It was like this compromise between your vision, my vision, Denise's vision. It came out really well. I really liked that projection and how it ended up coming out in the exhibition space.
Yeah, for sure.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
So yeah, it was like projection has become this thing where I've learned that I have to be very careful and very clear about how it's going to be done. Particularly because when you see the selection list, you're like, oh yeah, projection, oh yeah, this, and then you have to stop and think, do I have enough space? Do I have the darkness? Do I have what the artist wants for it to be a very good thing? And that takes me to tech writers, which has also become a little bit of a pet peeve of mine now. To the point that right now I'm working with this German artist called Charlotte Triebes, who does performative dance. And she's hired me to do her tech writers. And now it's like, no, I need this. You need to tell me like exactly the size, because once you send it to someone, these people are just working off this little document. And if you don't put it in there, nobody notices, which is something that happened to us at the Ammerman. With one TV that we didn't know that we had to provide. And in another work, we didn't know that it only had 3 hours worth of battery. And we were assuming that it could run uninterrupted. And that's because of writers that were not as well made as I wish they were. And I think you have experiences with that you could share with us as well.
Sure. I was thinking, sorry for clicking and glancing while you were talking. I was trying to pull up the photos of the installations you were talking about. So obviously, anything you can put on a screen in a show that's the easiest solution, right? So those pieces were less challenging, the ones you see on the TVs, right? But just kind of about the different, that was a very video. So again, I'll take 2 steps back, and the concept for the show, or the kind of overall idea, was of contact. That was the kind of theme for the symposium. And we had a lot of submitted works. So we kind of had a jury that selected them, selected out of them, that Rene was a part of. And then Rene put together the kind of final curatorial decision for what will be actually featured in the exhibition. Because, the nature of an open event like this, you get a lot of submissions that are just straight up videos, and then you need to decide how you're going to show them, right? So whether they're as an independent physical thing in the show, or whether they're part of the loop, or where they're that's still in the show, or whether they're even screened in the theater in the evening, you know, or any other kind of pop-up ideas on elsewhere on campus, right? We had a lot of different possibilities, and in particular, I don't know, Harshini, if you're seeing an image there of this immersive wraparound projection. It looks kind of glitchy in a dark space. That's a project called Dirt Scraper by Peter Burr. And that was that's a good example of how, you know, the process works, right? Because
that one.
Because Peter submitted it as a single screen version, because he's made a few versions of this project. It's a pretty epic, right, in terms of scale project, right? It's generated in real time. It's got this AI system. It's like presenting a whole city, essentially, kind of weird underground city of this fictional world. And the text for it was written by Porpentine, who's been, you know, pretty prominent in, you know, at least in new media kind of art circles in recent years. So we were very excited to get that submission. But, you know, the moment I looked it up, you know, I looked at the materials and I was like, you know, it would be so sad to show it on just one small screen, you know. And on his website, he had this wonderful wraparound installation shown. So, you know, so I started pushing on Rene.
Yeah, that was my first panic attack.
For like, hey, why don't we have this wonderful dark gallery where we show immersive kind of video installations. And I know that from personal experience, because I showed pieces like that there, right, of my own. So I know it's doable with the equipment we have. So so I kind of like introduced this curveball of, why don't we do the full installation in there? Sorry, Rene.
No, it came out great.
But I think ultimately we were all happy with it. You know, I heard from Peter that he was happy with it, and you know, you have to always improvise, right? Kind of as you do those things. And, you know, I think the way it was resolved, which was because of the physical structure of the space and because of, you know, some miscommunications, we didn't hang the projectors where he wanted them hung. So we couldn't cover the full width of the wall. But, you know, we solved it, and we solved it through kind of cropping it in a way that makes it look good and so on. And again, that was actually the benefit of having done a lot of this stuff as an artist. I kind of like proposed that solution because, you know, I've done it in the past. So I think that was resolved nicely ultimately.
In the end, I think it came out better than if it had been the whole wall on it. Like personally, that's my impression. I also am really happy with what we did with the floor. The accidental smell that came from those panels gave it a more urban feel as well. So it became of a even more immersive thing, because we had the texture of the flooring, which was this rubber composite thing. The smell of it, which smells like burning tires, and I spent days and weeks spraying it with vinegar just to make sure that it wasn't like overwhelming. But in the end, it did have this little smell, and I think that reinforced the themes of the work itself.
Yeah, totally. It was about this like dystopian, well, somewhat dystopian, at least, underground city, right? So it black and white kind of structure and all that. So using these rubber tiles for the floor, I think worked super well. So, which was Rene's idea, right? Which was like very nice left field kind of approach to how you can kind of solve a technical problem of like reflection and sound dampening and so on in this space. But it was it was a nice example of how the curator can augment the work rather than just kind of like accommodate it.
Yeah. So I found this magical picture, and because it also has this kind of, you know, I'm not going to say immersive, but installation set up with use of projectors, I'm assuming. Could you talk about kind of the differences between both of those works?
Sure. Well, this is a project by, well, the current iteration of it was presented by James Lee, who's a computer science faculty at Connecticut College, but he's got kind of, he's a very multi-talented person, right? Because he was initially trained, I think, as a game developer and designer, and then did a master's in electronic visualization, so still from the art side of things, and then kind of transitioned over to computer science and did his PhD in computer science and graphics and so on. So he really kind of has the skills to look at things from multiple directions. And it's based on a long-running project that he did in collaboration with several other Connecticut College faculty from dance and more kind of critical cultural studies and and several students. And the idea was to look at this dark history of quite a few of these educational institutions in the US where they used to require all students. This used to be a women's college up until the 70s. So back in the 20s, it used to require, I don't know if after the 20s, but at least in the 20s, maybe the 30s too, they used to require all students that were all female to take basically naked photos as they came in to kind of document their posture, because, you know, it was the relic of the kind of eugenics kind of thinking, right, that still existed at the time, right, where people's posture indicates something about their personality and so on. And this was common practice everywhere, right? So a lot of the biggest universities and colleges and most famous ones in the US did it especially. So they unearthed this archive of posture portraits that was basically completely hidden away. They had to go to Washington, D.C. to find it, and kind of then worked on ways of essentially recreating or reinventing it in different ways. And there were different iterations to the project, which is called the posture portraits, where the latest one doesn't really involve that archive anymore, but it's based on current students and faculty and staff at the college that just showed up to this pop-up session where they were being scanned with a Kinect. So these are essentially the 3D prints of that.
People.
Yeah, of people from the college community.
And in terms of projection, this one was like very fire and forget for us because James had already worked in that space. So we kind of just said, do what you need to do. But there were lessons to be learned from it. First of all, he used this very fancy laser projectors that are super short throw. But one of the things we didn't account for is that when you have light like from such a sharp angle, it throws the texture of the wall into focus. Like every single little dent on the wall comes out, every single little bump. And while because of how his projection works, it was able to hide it, but you could tell, like when you got close, you could see all the shadows from the texture of the wall. And that was something that was like, well, now that I work with, like if I ever work with short throw laser projectors, now I know what not to do. The other concern I had is people looking up because of, people want to see like, how is this working, right? And I was worried that someone was going to get free LASIK surgery or something. But it turned out that the very way the sign of the space was, it wouldn't let them do that. So that was a thing. But it was a really nice work. And you take the little scans, you put them on the pedestal in the middle, and it activates this whole conversation with the person in the screen and an animation. It was a very beautiful work. I think it's one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was really glad with how it came through. It was one of those that I had no idea what it was going to look like until it actually came out.
Yeah, it's kind of like a benefit, right? There's different venues, right? We didn't talk about types of venues, right? But like the benefit of showing in a kind of academic venue is that it's a place that's focused on process and research. So this is a project that was shown in different iterations. Basically, this is the third time. It's the third iteration of it that's shown. The first one was totally like hacker style pop-up kind of display in our, we have this kind of technology workspace in the lower level of our library where there's big visualization wall or, other kind of flexible kind of things. And that's where they did the initial scanning and showing of materials, and then it evolved into a full-blown installation at one of our previous symposia. And this was like probably the most refined, most kind of immersive version of it. So each time it's kind of like grown because it had the space to do that in, and it's nice. Yeah, it's nice to work with somebody that has all the tech skills to set their own thing up. But
yes.
It's also a bit of a trap sometimes, right? Because then you're not in the loop and talking about tech writers and so on, you only learn what's involved after it's already up and running, and then things have to be changed. So in this case, because it was running on a really fancy computer system and fancy projectors, everything was fancy, but it was different than all the other gear in the show.
Yes.
It took us, I think, a week to work out the bugs and have the students that ran the show be able to actually debug it or turn it on and off even. So, which James was great because he kept coming in and changing things and so on. But if you don't have the benefit of somebody who like literally works right in the place where it's shown, you're gonna have a problem.
Yeah, that work would have been so problematic if James had been like an external artist. It would have probably stopped working on the third day. But no. Sorry,
I will say that whenever I show interactive work, which is rare, but if I show like digitally interactive work as an artist, I make it a requirement for the place to have a good, solid, ideally wired internet connection, and I install remote login software on the computer so that I can debug things remotely. Otherwise, I've had the most radical version of this was when I had a show that traveled to a few places that had a drone flying up and down inside the gallery, like a pretty large drone with a sound system on it and lights and all kinds of stuff. So it was, complicated and also, potentially dangerous. And it was running for months, right? In initially in Israel and then in Canada. And I obviously couldn't be there most of the time. So I had the experience of being out on a hike somewhere in the desert or something, and logging in from getting a call from them that the drone was frozen in midair or something, and logging in and landing it from it felt very futuristic and weird. But it worked, that's so that the whole the idea of always having the more technically complicated the project is, the more you need to make sure there's access. There's ways that support, there's basically support, right? There's technical support available for it.
I think that idea of the remote access should be more commonly known. And it's something that I think in the future exhibitions that I do, it's something I will make sure that it exists. Abilities for the artists to log in remotely and hardwire internet connections. That's been a thing with me forever, but sometimes you cannot do that. It's at the end you have to negotiate with the space and with reality itself, right? And one of the things, jumping from that to video, which is a little simpler, I could not imagine. I can't imagine doing this again. I think I scavenged the whole of Connecticut College for TVs. I think we had 36 screens. It was a ridiculous amount of TVs. The cabling for that. Sorry?
I said it looked good though.
Yeah, it did. It's just the cabling for that. I learned the value of gaffer tape, and now it's my number one art supply. Gaffer tape covers the sense of the world. It somehow is invisible to the human eye, and it's this miraculous product. But going back to screens, it's just you don't think about it. Like you accept like so many video works, and then if you don't have a very solid plan, you're gonna run into problems. And I think that's one of the more important things to keep in mind if you're a curator is keep track of what you have in terms of materials, and then start finding alternative solutions to displaying the things. Because like, for example, that the one that we have right now, the TV, that thing rotates, and that was a whole feat of engineering that was done in like 3 days. And I actually did see people playing with it, and I really liked how it reinforced the themes of the exhibition. But at the same time, it's 2 TVs, they're hanging in there. We had to shim things. We had to, because you think you have identical things, and then it turns out that just 1 year of difference in TVs makes so much difference. And then you have the media players, so you have to make sure that everything is working correctly and together, and that the feeds, the videos are looping. And I have to say, video has become a thing that I respect so much more nowadays. It terrifies me, and I think that's a good thing. You have to fear this type of technology because otherwise you get complacent and you make assumptions. And you taught me so much. I think one of the things, the most valuable things from this exhibition, it's not even the exhibition itself, but the amount of knowledge that was shared. The thing, well, basically it was Connecticut College towards me, I think, mostly. Like with you and projection mapping, with Brian and just actual physical building and all these things. It was very valuable to me, like learning all these things. And now it's things that I'm implementing into my own practice in both the online gallery. And right after I did this, I went into another exhibition and I used a lot of what I learned in that one as well.
That's awesome.
But,
that's great to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, like for us, it was the idea of, again, of not doing everything in-house, but actually having an outside eye and, somebody with kind of breadth and depth of knowledge with working with, media artwork was great, right? Because otherwise it's always this kind of internal conversation, and or it comes down to the one person because we're a small place, right? So we have a lot of people with a lot of expertise, but it's, there's like one of each, right? So
Yeah.
I was certainly tired of being the only person to decide about like showing video or that sort of thing. So it was really great to have this conversation around this, for sure. So definitely learned a lot from that too. What do I have to say about part of it? Well, and part of it, I think the main kind of the big upgrade that happened, other than just the vastness of the scale of the show, was that having these kind of wild conceptual ideas like those rotating TVs, I think was again, that's the place where like an outside curator can really lift things up, right? Or an in-house curator if we had a position like that, right? Which we don't. So when we don't hire a curator.
I mean, I'm available.
Right. Awesome. Hey, if it were down to me, that would be great, but having like physical structures that you build, right, that are kind of just meant to enhance the art and not just as a wall, but like something more than that. I recently had a conversation with Ben Chaffee, who is the director of the gallery at Wesleyan University, and he told me about an exhibition they had for an artist called Christopher Williams, and he's a photographer, I believe, but he shows his work all over the world, but he's a conceptual artist too, right? So what he's been doing basically over the past few years, which apparently started in the Art Institute in Chicago, at a show there, and they built these temporary walls for the show, and he asked them at some point, "Can I have one of those?" They're like, "Okay, weird, all right." So, he took the wall, and now he has a traveling show of walls, of like temporary walls from all over the world,
Oh my God.
all over the world. So, that can
That's
turn into artwork as well, right? We should have given him
wow.
the seed that we built.
The sea. Oh yeah, I had so. So in the end, I think what I would like to hear from you, Nadav, is like your thoughts, your final thoughts. What would you have liked? If there were some things that you would change or things that you learned, like anything that you want to feedback on about about the Ammerman show.
Right. So the contact exhibition.
Yes, the contact exhibition.
Um, well, I mean, let's see. We were overall really happy with how the exhibition came out, and we heard, it's nice that the way that this exhibition existed is kind of different than most shows, because in most exhibitions you have the artist at most come for the reception, and then maybe there's a gallery talk or something at some point, whereas here this was opened as part of a essentially 3-day symposium, where most of the artists were present for most of the duration, if not all of it, which was very different, right? Because they got to kind of live with the exhibition for a few days and have events happen within it, and connect with people within it in different ways. So that was great. That was a great experience. The thing we always want for these shows, right? The biggest challenges, right? We talked about some of the upsides of having a kind of institutional venue or an academic venue. The obvious biggest downside, and especially when we hear from Harshini, right? Well, that would be an interesting contrast, right? Is it's in an academic institution that's not in a big city, right? That's like it's not in the middle of nowhere, but it's kind of out in between big cities, and it's far enough away, right? It's a couple hours away by train or by car and so on, that it's not like, people are gonna run to it from wherever, New York or Boston, which are the two big cities, in the area. So, you get this really, I think, totally high level of production, really nice looking show on any level, but then you don't get the amount of crowds that you would get if this were, in a city, right? In a bigger city. So that's, to me, is the biggest challenge, right? So the biggest challenge is just getting bodies in the space, right? Getting people to be in the space. And there are different ways of handling that. So I'll just mention a show that we co-sponsored that just happened, that just closed. It was called Sixth Dimension. It was curated by one of our fellows, Juanita Sunday. And it was an Afrofuturism focused show. And it mixed the artists showing in it some of them were from the region and even really local, and some of them were national exhibiting. There were folks from California and other parts of the country. And that show, a core part of it was this very kind of lively programming, right, that featured performances and spoken word pieces and panels, and just like a reception with live music, all of that. And because it focused heavily, or at least half of it, the people shown were from the local community and were really involved with working on this subject matter, there was a huge turnout, right? There were hundreds of people that would show up to these events, a lot of whom weren't even from the college, right? So again, so it was like a different, much more focused target audience. So our thing was broader in terms of its focus, and had a lot of presence from college community, and obviously all the participants. We had about 80 participants, let's say 80 to 100 actually participants in the symposium. So they were there, obviously, but it wasn't like otherwise thousands of people came to see it. So to me, that's the biggest challenge, because you put up this beautiful thing and then like you want more people to actually experience it.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's one of the more important things. I still like, I think it had a fantastic turnout, especially for the days that I was there.
Mhm.
And I think if this show had been in, like, say, New York or something like that, it would have been the talk of the town. I think we had some fantastic artists, some incredible work, and everything surrounding it was really, really interesting. And before I forget, I want to add that we have a new exhibition at New Media Caucus that just opened yesterday, called Textiles, and it's actually from one of the artists at the concept exhibition, Morgan Green. So if you
Oh,
have any time,
amazing.
go and visit it.
Yay.
Yeah, it's an interactive
It's really
collection of
good.
works.
That's great.
It's really interesting.
I checked it out. I checked it out yesterday. It's really good.
And it's about treating text as literal, like using the term text in its full meaning. So text as texture, text as a textile, and weaving meanings and weaving code with text and meanings and all these things. It's a really interesting work. The whole website was coded by Morgan themselves, so that also gives it a different feel from what we normally do at the New Media Caucus. Anyhow, with this, we're going to close the first part of this talk, which was focusing on the Ammerman Center and the Contact exhibition. I want to thank you for your time and for being like such a fantastic guest, Nadav. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. And I will put up a couple of what do you call it, plugs, which is
Yes, go.
that the biennial symposium is now transitioning to becoming a triennial symposium because, pardon my French, but it's a shitload of work. So, and we want to keep this, quality up and so on, and support all the participants and so on. But there is an open call for it, right? Whenever it, in the year before it happens. So I hope people look out for that call, and that call is both for straight up participation and also for commissioned work, right? Which this time we had 4 different commissioned projects, and those are essentially residencies that are funded and so on. So it's a good deal for artists. So please look out for that. That's going to happen in basically not next year, but the following year. So that would be 24, right? 2024, 25. So yeah, it was a pleasure, Rene.
Yeah, no, oof. Okay, so keep an eye out for that. I highly recommend it. It's the Ammerman show, well, the Ammerman exhibition, Contact exhibition. The symposium, sorry, the Ammerman Symposium. Yeah, that's what it is. And I highly recommend artists to participate in it. They have some fantastic people in-house and out-house, and it's all fantastic. All right, so now we're going to move on to part 2 of this episode. This is about Manifest.io, which is Harshini's own symposium and their own experiences with this whole madness that is running these kind of deals and exhibitions. So why don't you tell us about the whole thing from the beginning?
Sure. So Manifest.io really started because I always, and whenever I begin this story, I realize that it was really born out of rage. Because when I moved to Berlin, and obviously you have amazing symposiums that happen in Europe, like the ISEA, the International Symposium for Electronic Arts, or Ars Electronica, and I went to these festivals, and I was, always in the back of my head kind of pedestalize these symposiums, and then when you get there, it's like, oh, it's great, it's fine. Where's the representation? Where's the diversity? How can you claim to be an international symposium but still have a very like Eurocentric or westernized point of view of what new media and electronic art can be? So I mean, even in Ars Electronica, there was, some Latino representation, but I remember they made like a very big deal of like, oh, if you go downtown and like the Linz Art Museum or whatever, we have an exhibition of Latina artists, and it was like 5 people, and it's like, that's, 5 people out of the hundreds that are participating. So I was really frustrated by that, but also it was a really eye-opening experience to, come from the global south and you have these imaginations of what these symposiums are like, and then realize actually, there's no reason to pedestalize it, right? To put it on a podium. So I was thinking a lot about that kind of like lack of diversity, lack of representation. At the same time, in my own university where I was doing my master's degree, I was doing a new media design, which was previously called Media Spaces, which I actually liked the previous name. But we were in a really frustrating position because we had actually lost the floor that we occupied. So they rented out, the university rented out the third floor, which is where we were. So I would make a joke of like media spaces, see you in the metaverse, because we actually have no physical space to meet or do our work or have our classes in. So when it came time for our final thesis exhibition, we had to really fight for space, you know, and our heads of department, our faculty were fighting for space. When in a program which we need space in order to, we need physical space in order to create our installations. So it's very frustrated by the whole bureaucracy behind that. And I really wanted to make sure that I was setting myself up so that when I graduate, I would also teach in the new media department. So I really wanted to make sure that when I have the chance to teach, that my students do not go through the same frustration of having to fight for space, that they have access to resources, and that they're able to do whatever they need to do in order to make their final projects. In Ars Electronica, actually, there was a whole section devoted to like university students. And I was really surprised to encounter several Berlin-based universities there because there's Berlin is like the hub for art and technology. You know, like you hear so much amazing work coming out from here, but there's actually very little integration between all the universities. So I was really surprised that by the time I graduated, I didn't really know anyone from a different institution. And yet here I was seeing their work in Ars Electronica, right? One of the biggest things that happens in Europe. So one thing that I was thinking about a lot was like, okay, how are they here and we're not here? But also the quality of the work is so good. It's excellent. Like, what is the gap? What is the gap in the education that I have received, in the education my peers are receiving, in the quality of work that we're producing, in terms of like the quality of work that I'm witnessing from another institution that is a bachelor's program, maybe not even a master's, and yet their work is really, really high quality. So what is the gap? So I really wanted to create a space that was an egalitarian space for students to showcase their work, you know, like no judgment, don't think about this as a final assessment or anything, but really showcase your work, your idea, your approaches. Like, is it a work in progress? Like, how can we give you feedback and like make it better and improve? But also to create a system where we actually had different universities participate and exchange equipment and exchange knowledge, you know? So we were very like grateful to have like the help of HTW, one of the biggest universities here in Berlin. They have like 15,000 students, which is madness. UDK, which is the University of the Arts, and other institutions that they actually participated. And we were able to ask them for equipment, you know, like in the university I'm in, University of Applied Sciences, we don't have enough Kinects, we don't have enough projectors for everybody. So can I create a network where we're actually like borrowing and facilitating that process so that students can do their work without hindrance. So this was like the main thing to kind of create this bigger network. So aside from being like, I want my students to showcase their work, it was also like, how can we really like create a community and connect all these different students that are especially coming in from all parts of the world, and actually help them build a network so that when they graduate, you know, they can say, oh, like there was this interesting master's program in a different university, or there's this amazing people that I met, we're going to collaborate together. So there were several objectives behind Manifest.io. The structure of it was really like that there would be talks in the morning and then an exhibition that would take place in the evening because it is winter here. And so we really cherish the very little natural sunlight that we can get during the day. But it meant that we had a really early sunset time of like 4 p.m., right? So we would actually have talks in the morning in the space that we were in, which was Alte Münze, which is a very important like cultural center. They do a lot of performances and exhibitions anyway, from everything from drag shows to photography exhibitions. So I was very grateful to meet them. And then I pitched them my idea. They were very supportive. And so we had a space of about 270 square meters where we could use. And so the idea was to start with talks in the morning, all the installations, everything set up, but create a space where these talks could take place. Have that go on until like 3 p.m. and then have an hour where we transform the space, which is insane to do all of this in an hour. But have an hour where we transform the space, and then by the time the sun sets, the space is activated for an exhibition, which would house primarily projections and sound installation work. So we had I curated about 50 different artists. Insanity.
Yeah.
Less is more. Less is more for sure. It's a very big learning curve. But I curated about 50 artists, and yeah, it was very one of the things I think I don't know if I even told you what I was doing, Rene, because it was an idea I had in October, and then I started to meet and network people, and then finally in December it was like, great, everybody loves it. What's next? Find a venue, right? And just start to get it out. And the idea was to do it in February of 2023. So in December 2022, I'm looking for a venue for what will be a show in February 2023, because that's when the semester ends for the universities. So it would be aligned with the final projects and everything. It's also a very hectic time in Berlin because there's CTM and Transmediale, which are very, very big new media festivals. And so we were at Berlinale as well, which is a film festival. So we were in this calendar of lots of events happening in Berlin, but there was some wiggle space, some empty room where it's okay, maybe we could get an audience, maybe we could get a crowd. But that was the kind of starting point and the general structure of it.
That just, it's terrifying. It sounds terrifying, but it's amazing.
I mean, also, that I'm freaking maniac, right? I do something and I'm this will happen. But I was very grateful that I actually teamed up with a studio called Time Lab, which is run by Basil Naori, who's a Jordanian sound designer and architect. And we're colleagues. We work together in the university. And I told him my idea. He was like, can we do it as part of Time Lab? And I was like, if you can help me do this, then yes. If you can find the funding, then of course. And so he was able to not only source the funding, but really be someone that I could rely on, which is so difficult to find. And so we really built this together.
So I think I want to hear any comments from Nadav before we lose him.
Yeah, I mean, this is incredible. Yeah, and it's, so if I understand, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, the main, what was the main crowd of artists that you were featuring? Or a lot of them were kind of current or kind of recent graduates from kind of new media programs?
Right. So it was primarily current students, recent graduates. And the kind of impetus was also to make sure that it wasn't a student exhibition, right? That the work that young artists are contributing have as much seat at the table as, someone that's already quote unquote established. So it was primarily current students, recent graduates, but then I also invited well-known artists based in Berlin or based in Germany to contribute work so that their work was alongside the students' work. And that goes for the talks as well, that we had Playtronica Studio, which is a massive studio that develops these touch sensors, speaking, alongside or after students that were talking about their thesis projects, for example.
So, I mean, that seems to me probably one of the, alongside the super accelerated, time scale, right? Probably one of the biggest potential points of friction. So I'm curious how that worked out, right? In terms of the mix of kind of professional artists and students and everything in between.
Yeah, so I would say that with the professional artists, I really wanted to make sure that one of the challenges was that, I recently moved to Berlin. I've been here a year and a half. It's really I'm coming in here without not many people knowing who I am or what I do. And all of a sudden, coming from an artist background, it's let's curate a thing, so because I would talk to people and I would be like, I'm doing this symposium, and they're like, so what do you do normally? And I'm an artist, I guess. So a lot of it was like, also, how can I make people trust me? Because it's a lot of people that I also, I have my students and that's fine, but that's maybe about 15 people or 20 at max. We were very selective, actually. But how can I make sure that these people that I'm, kind of coming into Berlin to build a community can also trust me? So with the professional artists, with some of them, I met with them or I knew of them online, or, I hunted them down and I was like, would you show your work here? And I would take the responsibility for setting up their work. So that was also a challenge to, setting up video for me is familiar, but setting up an augmented reality experience is not. So what are the demands of that? Because that's, projection work, which requires a very dark room, like isolated space, and maybe there's sound, is very different to the requirements of an AR work, which actually needs some light, to detect the floor. Who would have thought
Exactly.
you need to see the floor? So that was really challenging. So that was one of the kind of incentives in having these artists. And I was very careful to curate people that I knew would not be pretentious, that I knew if they came, they would actually offer help. They would talk to the students. So one of the people I was really grateful to have is Biliam Teshepe, who goes by Electronaut, who's very big in the touch designer community. He makes like basically all the tutorials that students watch to create their own work, So he actually he offered his work, and I was like, oh my God, thank you. And he actually came for both days of the symposium and was helping students with their touch designer patch,
Oh,
I
that's
would I
amazing.
would kind of turn to them and be like, you see that very attractive man in the red jacket? He's Electronaut. You should ask him, for help, And so it's very, very amazing also to have like not only him, but other members from the touch designer community actually, contributing to making the work better. And that was the main thing, to also make it a learning experience. But in terms of friction, oh my God, so many artists are such divas. It's like,
I did warn you.
I scoff at it, but yes, I was like, oh my God, was I like this? I think one of the challenges is also, I mean, this was an opportunity for students that have never exhibited before to have that chance to exhibit. So that's amazing, but it comes with the challenge of, okay, you've never done this before, and I will have to suffer through this process, and that's fine. That's totally fine, because I'm learning as we go. It's my first time doing such a major event. But I would say like one of the challenges is probably like starting from the very get-go with the tech writer, like I need very specific information from you and I don't have it. So when you come into the space, I have a very different idea of what the work is meant to be. We had one augmented reality work which required 10 meters of space, and it was kind of about the concept of the panopticon. So I always imagined that it was 10 meters in height, not 10 meters in
Sprawl.
horizontal.
Yeah.
And I was like, you need 10 meters in like space. Okay, we have to work this out. So one of the ways that I tried to solve it was I was very purposeful with where people were positioned in the space, in the sense that, I mean, yeah, you have to worry about like sound and video and not clashing and whatever, but also I was very careful to put people that were probably from a university or that they had never, encountered, as someone that they had never met before, so that you have to share resources. You have to communicate, because if you turn the power off here, you are affecting somebody else. So you have to talk to each other, so especially with augmented reality, if someone was like, oh, I need to like figure out which space works best. And I was like, great, have you met this other person? They're also like really into AR stuff. They have a similar theme that you're exploring in your work. Why don't you work together to problem solve this? So actually having the students try to problem solve and work together and meet people that they never met before. Because one of the things that I noticed in like CTM and Transmediale is that you have a lot of young artists representing their work, but they don't talk to their neighbor, which is crazy to me. Like, why would you not talk to the person right next to you? You spending the whole day together. And so I really wanted to facilitate that communication, and in that attempt, try to also alleviate some of the problem solving mayhem.
Yeah, yeah. So that, I mean, that's totally, that's a thing we really value, right? That's a core thing we try to do in our symposium too, is have people spend time together and just kind of talk
Mhm.
about their stuff, which often, yeah, often you have these new media festivals, which are more like a showcase kind of thing, but there isn't a kind of community building as much, right? So by the way, I think you'd be interested to visit at some point or to connect with. There's a festival called Currents New Media in
Oh yeah,
San
of
Jose
course.
in the US. So, and that sounds like there's a lot of connection points with what you're doing. And, I think the thing I value the most about them, so it's been run by this couple, Frank and Mariana, who are amazing, and they're connected kind of to although the community that all goes all the way back to the 60s and 70s of like, Stena and Woody Vazolka and that sort of thing, right? The kind of pioneers of video and computer art and that sort of thing, but also to a ton of young people, right? And part of the way they do it, a major part, and I was going to ask you about that for yours, is their internship program is incredible, right? I try to always push my students with like both hands to like go and do that there. It's really unbelievable because they basically create, it's almost like an internship residency or like a festival production residency, like you come out of there both like really understanding how this thing works and also just making a lot of connections. So they rent a house in Santa Fe for students that come from all over the country or other places in the world even, and basically live there for a month
Oh, that's
producing the
awesome.
festival. And they also I don't remember if that's an internship or like a paid position, but they also have grad students usually from EDR programs that are kind of in the supervisory positions. So it's a whole apparatus made out of different levels of students that is really producing. They also have some professional producers and stuff, right? Kind of in the mix, right? So it's not just on the students, but that's a big, most of the production of the festival happens with this amazing kind of group of
That's awesome.
yeah, so that, I think that really contributes because you have, you just work with these folks all the time, so you have really nice conversations and you know
I didn't know about that side of it. Current new media has always been on my radar, but as an artist, I'm like, one day I will apply to this thing. And I'm like, I have no good ideas next year, you know? So I didn't know about that
yeah, do
whole
it, do it.
part of it. Yeah.
I think one of the most important, like impressive things here is I feel like there's a lot of parallels between what the Ammerman was doing and what you did, right? And the fact I keep thinking we had tons of artists because when I talk about it, I generally just have the perspective of the exhibition itself, where I just had to handle that little bit. But Nadav had to wrangle performance, music, video. What else did we have? The whole
Panels, participatory events, workshops.
talks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a massive thing. But at the same time, it's really impressive what you pulled out in a month. I mean, it
I
went from,
mean,
oh, I have this idea to it's done. And it's like, what?
I really relied on Basil. So he's really, I remember I told him I'm not good with like spatial things, you know, because I'm a digital artist. Don't give me space. Like, just can you do this? Because he comes from an architecture background. So having him and you know, especially from sound and me from video and digital and marketing, we're like kind of a great duo. Because you know, we looked at this, we did a site visit together, and he was like already started to plan like building walls and where the walls would go, and I was like, why do we need walls? You know, it was like to isolate the sound, to do this, to that, to separate the space, to create an experience, and I'm like, sure, could you do it? Like, I don't want to have to think about walls, you know, so we were kind of a really great duo because he was really great at thinking about what the experience of the audience would be. And I was interested in thinking about like what conversations are happening between each works, you know, if we place them together in this way or that way. So that was really like, and I have to thank, you know, like Rene, because I felt like we connected during the pandemic because I really wanted to learn about new media curation. And this felt like also the combination of all that time of like mentorship and friendship. So I felt like prepared ish, maybe not for like a thing to put together in a month, but I felt
like, yeah.
But
I
I
would
had
not
to
have done
wear,
it like that.
yeah. But in terms of like all of these like multiplicity of roles, like because I was doing the social media and the marketing because I'm a control freak and I came from a previous job where I did that. So I was like, I am the one who can do this. I can do this. But I was also like, you know, one of the moderators during the talks and like one of the people documenting when I realized there were no like photographers, you know, on at the site. So it was like a lot of different hats involved. We were a very, very small team. We had like the students helping, and we had a team of 3 students, especially that were like very, very core to the whole symposium happening. It was a lot. It's a lot of hats. It's very hard to like, you know, do social media while you're like listening to the talk that you're about to moderate and, you know, making sure that you're still, you know, everything's still running smoothly. So it'll be interesting to see because this will definitely be like an annual thing.
So
It'll be
hey,
interesting to see how it grows.
let us know about it in advance, and maybe we can send you some interns.
Yes, I need reliable people.
Well, because the thing to know, I'm not sure how it works in Germany, but like in quite a few programs in the US, you have a model. That's what our center has, where students, if they find an internship that's kind of in the field, the college pays them, so they get at least some. I mean, it depends on where that happens, right? Which is interesting. I think in Berlin this could work. They could actually live off of that. In New York, for example, they still have to have the organization pay them a little bit, otherwise they can't, afford rent and food and stuff. But it's still a decent enough amount that it could work. So that, and I assume, I know other institutions, other art schools have that too. That
Yeah,
could be
I
a
mean,
source of
that would
people.
be awesome. I was like very grateful. We had like one university that I reached out to here called Catalyst, that they are like an extremely technical place. They're also like so far away. So they're kind of like shrouded in mystique because people are like, what do they really do there? But I knew about them because the place that they're in is called Funkhaus, and it's a venue that has like lots of studios and also the university attached to it. So there's also like a 4D spatial sound studio called Monum based there. So I knew about them through kind of like seeing that campus in that area. And so I reached out to them and I was really like grateful that they offered three of their students volunteered to participate, and they are coming from an extremely technical background, which was so important. Like I did an open call sheet for volunteers, and it was like, please do not sign up for technical if you do not have technical experience. I want you to learn, but this is not the place to learn what an HDMI cable is. This is the place to make things happen. So because that's the other thing, right? I love the enthusiasm of some students, but I'm like, you do not have the skills for this right now. We have to make this event happen. It was I don't know how long you had to set up the Ammerman show, but we had one full day of setup for what would be a two-day event, right? So it was a lot of sleepless nights to prep and make sure that we were ready to come into the venue and work.
We had what, a month?
Oh my God.
No,
The luxury.
we had, well, it depends. No, we had many months, right? Because we started working on the space and then the initial ideas in July, I think, or
yeah.
And the show happened at the end of November.
November.
So it's 4 months. I mean, we curated the participants up until the end of July, and then we started working on the concept, and then
that still feels tight in terms of time, like for the massive amount of
that was still
work.
tight, but but it's kind of awesome that we're both right in this conversation now, right? Because it shows the scale, right, the different scales at which you could work. You could also put something up in it in a day, and it's kind of awesome that you did that, right? It's like the audacity, as they say, right?
The audacity.
The audacity. The thing, I think, yeah, we had like 4 months, but in fact, like builds, we had like 3 days, like a week at most.
Well,
Because
no,
we
we
like
had 3
challenges.
weeks. We had the gallery for 3 weeks, but that's the thing, right? It's a good example of just how what happens when you have all these challenges, right? So like, it's enough that you have some people being sick and other things happen, so just random technical stuff prevented us from working for the first, I think, week and a half or something, mostly. So yeah, so the time got eaten up very fast. So most of the build happened in less than 2 weeks, I would say.
Yeah. Well, we did have to build a lot and paint a lot and like do the little things to the space. I think that, but the actual setup, like just, okay, the building is ready. I think it took place in 2 days, 3 days.
The
Like,
final, well, that's the thing. When you
yeah.
set up a new media show, right, you always have these different stages. The work on the space took several weeks, and building walls and so on. But then it was not quite finished because of various technical and human glitches. And then we came to the stage of wiring things up and doing the tech side of things, which took a few days, right? But the things overlapped.
Yeah, that is true.
Exactly. Yes, and
it
so
was.
you did all in one day, everything?
I mean, it requires a village, right? Like we were very grateful to have not only the students from Catalyst, but there was also, aside from the talks and the exhibition, our final night also had performances. And our performances were curated by Recordat, which is a Palestinian-based radio station that they're also based in Berlin. And so they helped us with the curation, but they were also we had like a couple of people from Recordat the day of setup to actually help put this thing together, right? Because it's like, we have to build walls and I am not the person to do that, right? So we had them help out, another group of artists from Ephemeral Tomorrow that they actually also teach at the university. They were there also to help out, and some of the students as well. So it takes a village, to like make it happen. Otherwise it would just not, and I was really kind of grateful for, there's one university in particular called HTV, that they were so wonderful to work with. Not only was there like tech writers, press materials on point, but they had exhibited their work before, the ones that they would be showing in the symposium, which you could clearly see the difference, right? Like that experience has in terms of remounting a work. So they came in, they were like, oh, we need like an hour or 2 hours. They came in at 3 to set up their stuff. We had brought in all of their equipment beforehand, all of their stuff. They came in at 3, they were out by 5, like super efficient. So we got like the second floor done. And also to make life more complicated, because why would I not? On the second day of the symposium, it was, a different series of talks, obviously, but we also added 6 new works to the space. So because we would have access to an outdoor container space that we would not have access to the day previously. So we did a couple of outdoor installations that would then lead into the performance section. And we had one artist that could only exhibit on one day and one artist that could only exhibit on the second day. So we actually, took down their work on the 17th night, and then the 18th morning, set up the next artist's work, So it was a lot of like, lots of working together and lots of coordination. And so if you came on the second day, there would be some new work in the space, which is purely like a logistical thing to solve. But it worked out nicely because we did have people coming back. And we had like 400 people from the public, which was insanity. It's almost double what I anticipated.
That's wonderful.
Sounds like the Ammerman should just hire Harshini to run the show.
I'm available. I'm unemployed and available.
Very cool.
I remember once this whole thing was over for you, we jumping into a conversation, and I think this is something curators don't talk about a lot, but it's the I'm gonna be super honest. It's the trauma.
Oh yes.
It doesn't matter how well a show is, how fantastic your teammates are, and even like you don't have complaints about them because they were fantastic. There's always a little bit of trauma involved in like the things that happen that's nobody's fault, and it just piles on, right? Like something didn't come through, or something broke, or something failed, and it's nobody's fault.
We actually lost power in the second day.
Oh no.
For a solid amount of time, but it worked out because there were some performances happening and not all of the power was gone. It was only in one section. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I would say Basel is like the physical doer, you know, like, or like if I need someone to like problem solve something, he's there, like he's there following up on everything, and and great, and building walls, you know, like making the spatial experience happen. But one of my main roles was like making sure everyone is happy. Like, is the communication good? You know, like how do I have, you know, 5, 6, I think 6, 7 universities participating. You know, I have the majority of artists are people that I've never met before or don't know. How do I make sure that there's clear communication with what's happening, this event that's going to happen in like, you know, 4 weeks or less? You know, how do I make sure that, you know, all of the things that they need are there? Like if they have any like technical needs or desires or whatever, that they have everything. How do I make sure that those artists are happy? How do I make sure the institutions are happy? How do I make sure the venue is happy? You know, like making sure like, you know, I'm the one that like knows all of the technicians' names in the venue, right? Making sure that, you know, they feel respected, because I know what it's like to be treated poorly when you're a technician. So making sure that everyone's good and that the communication is clear. So I may not be the one, you know, setting up the space or building the physical structures in the space, because I'm the one working behind the scenes to make sure that everything's running smoothly and all the logistics are working. So that's a lot of like, it's a lot of like also emotional input, you know, because you want to make sure everyone is catered for. But then I have artists that are like, why didn't you post about me on the Instagram? Like, you sent it to me today, you know, like this was due some time ago, you know, or, you know, having issues with their power or whatever, and making sure that they feel heard, right? Rather than just brushed off. So it's a lot of emotional input. So I didn't really anticipate right after the symposium, just like a downward, you know, spiral of like, you know, so it's like, well, you
exhaustion. End up becoming,
Sorry, go for it.
You end up becoming everybody's therapist.
Yes.
I think that's a thing that nobody tells you about. It's that you're dealing with people in the end, right? And every single person has a different approach to life, a different approach to how they work, a different, even like a way of communicating, and a way that they like to be communicated to or at. And it forces you to be like in this constant status of flux. You have to keep like all these steps, like, oh, I have to talk to this person like this. I have to be much more accounting for certain things with this other person. I have to keep reminding this other person of this and this other person for that. And
I really felt the curador, you know, that meaning behind curator.
Like the healer.
The healer.
Definitely. I think something that we don't teach in art schools enough. So there's 2 things, and this probably gets me in trouble with some people, but artists have to accept the reality that they cannot exist as, I have social anxiety, I don't want to engage with no one. Like, as an artist, you have to get out, you have to put up your work. You also have to be open to negotiating with people, open to meeting people halfway in terms of how you address people, how you live your life, how you everything. And at the same time, curators really need, like, not all curators, hashtag, but a lot of curators tend to be very dictatorial. I don't know if that's based on trauma. Like, I don't know if everybody starts like you or I did, trying to be like everybody, like trying to keep people happy and being inclusive and all these things. And the demands of the work chip it away from you. But a lot of curators end up being like very like, no, it's this. I don't care. Do this. And you hear all these horror stories of artists and curators getting into shouting matches or fights. And I think curatorial programs do not work hard enough on teaching curators how to be people, people, like a people spirit, like someone that's, how do you deal with the human factor, right? Because a lot of us want to be curators. We're never told how much it is people skills. That's it, people skills.
Yeah. I think I messaged you on like the first night of my symposium because I finally found like a corner, which is like by like an emergency exit staircase where I could like be alone and do an Instagram post for an artist, right? And I finally found a corner, and I think I messaged you and I was like, how do you do this? Like, how do you do all of, like, there's so many different aspects and angles to being a curator, right? And the people factor is like the biggest thing. Not only are you trying to figure out how each work can have its space to shine, but then you also have to deal with the demands of the artist, and that's onto no fault unto their own, right? Like sometimes it's their first time, or you know, it's unfamiliar or whatever, but there's that huge like the human factor, the people factor. And that was like, I had to keep reminding myself of like, okay, there's like, you know, 50 artists, 400 people. You can't please everybody, you know? So someone will think that I am dictatorial, or someone will think this, and I have to find a way to be okay with that. And I'm not there yet, you know. I think that was like the massive like downward spiral of the next day of like being like, you know, was everything okay? Well, no, everything's not okay. We did this in like a month, you know, and it's the first time. It's a learning experience, right?
Yeah.
So I can hear the rational voice in me being like, it's all good, you know, we learn. But I think that's a huge, I'm like, I really don't know how you do this consistently, right? Deal with the living artist, but also, you know, make sure that everything's okay. Yeah.
So I think, well, first of all, I'm pretty sure I know at least 3 artists that hate me, even based on the Ammerman show, or at least have a very low opinion of me. But I can't help that. Like, I cannot please everyone. There's sometimes things that they want that are not compatible with things that I had planned or what the reality of the world is. Sometimes artists get so lost, or they have such a strong vision. Let's say it that way. They have this so strong vision of what their work should be that they lose sight of everything else, and the realities of an exhibition space, of a small program, of who, like, all the other people that exist around them, that they kind of, I think that's what leads to the diva thing. They're passionate about what they do, which is fantastic. It's just there needs to be a balance in terms of compromise. And as a curator, I've reached a point where, and I told you this is what I told you, like, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing half-ass. Which I know it sounds super bad, but
I don't know if I agree, but sure.
Has to be. You cannot run and fire on all cylinders all the time. You will burn out, and you will hate your job, and you will hate everything.
Oh,
some
yeah,
things have to be let go.
In that respect, yeah, I do agree, because I realized some years ago that when I was doing work for clients, this is gonna sound so terrible to say on a podcast, but I realized also in terms of like my academic work, I realized that my good was great enough, and I was like, oh, okay, I can focus on other things, you know, like, you don't need to push, because for whose benefit is that, right?
Exactly.
So I think, I mean, I remember like on the days of the symposium, just being like, how is this happening today? You know, like, and I would turn to Basil and he'd be like, it's all good. You know, I'm like, why are you so calm and optimistic? You know? So I would be like, I would be like preparing to moderate or making sure the speakers were settled in or something. And I was like, how is this happening today? And it, and people would come to me and be like, Harshini, we have a problem. I'm like, cool. And they would tell me what it is. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, do you want us to do it? I'm like, that would be great. You can take care of that, So I think relinquishing some control, settling into it's happening, it's all fine, it's gonna be good, it's gonna be a learning experience either way, I think was a really important part of the experience.
Yeah. So real quick, I lost power on my headphones.
Oh no, but
So,
I can hear you clearly.
yeah, it's just the audio is going to change quality. I just want everybody to know why I
Okay.
suddenly sound like I'm in a bathroom or something. But yeah, no, okay. So that whole it's worth half-assing it. It's just a lesson to let nothing perfect is ever released. You
Yeah.
can spend your whole life working on this artwork or this exhibition or this thing, and it's not perfect now. It's never perfect enough. And when we're taught that everything has to be perfect, everything has to be flawless, and that's not true. You can half-ass things sometimes. There's things where
I just extended my arm as I like swatted my husband away. But yeah.
So you have to, accept that sometimes things just have to be good enough.
Mm.
Like, is it good enough to be shown? Is it good enough that it works? Is it, in the end, the important thing is, is the artist getting shown?
Yeah.
Yes, no. Is it perfect? Probably not, but I don't have enough space, or I don't have the perfect gear, which is what happens with this. Like the projection spaces, for example, with Denise. Yeah, would it have been perfect if we had a perfect space for a projection? Yeah, we could not have that. So we had to make compromises, visual compromises, and decided, you know what, let's lean into it. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And actually that good enough ended up being perfect for what we needed.
Yeah.
So I think that's the lesson. Like, it's good enough.
Otherwise,
yeah,
and I think particularly like in the framework of a symposium, there are other goals. It's not just an exhibition. There are other goals. Did people find new collaborators at the end of this event?
Exactly.
Did they learn something new? Did their touch designer patches improve? Or did they learn something from setting up their work? Were they valuable to somebody else? Did they meet new people? I think all of these things are part of it. One of the greatest things was like people telling me afterwards, like, oh my God, like I have like new followers on Instagram, or like I met people that were like really interested in the theme that I was exploring, or I have like new connections or whatever. Like, we had like really important people that were also speaking, and I wanted to make sure that I am not doing everything, like there should be other moderators. So I even had like two other students, Erica Rodriguez and Ana Luisa, who are amazing artists, but also Ana Luisa comes from a journalist background. Erica comes from a film and writing background. So actually having them also moderate, Ana Luisa wants to work as a producer. So can I actually like create a space where you're moderating someone who's a producer for a big studio? Like we should be able to facilitate that and create that environment. We had really important, aside from, we had the general public, which Berlin is amazing in terms of getting people to show up. But I really did not anticipate 400 people. So that was like next level. But we also had really important studios present, really important artists present that were there and meeting the students. We had like even the Tamschik Media Space, they were there. So, which is a major studio based in Berlin. We had Field IO that were also performing through the collective of Ephemeral Tomorrow. So they, it was a success in those fronts, right? That to be able to be like, to be able to turn to one student and be like, have you shown the head of Tamschik Media your work? Let me introduce you, like being able to facilitate those connections so that you're on the radar, and so I have to also remind myself that there are other goals, and I have to remind myself this is the first time I did anything like this. Usually I've done like events before, but never an exhibition. and also never building something from scratch,
Yeah.
so that was it was a challenge, but it was worthwhile. And obviously it's worthwhile, otherwise I would not be doing this again, right? There's going to be a second iteration. We'll start planning in October this time around, not in January.
Makes so much sense. I think so drawing two parallels of first things ever, like for example, the whole gallery, like this podcast, the exhibition program. I'm doing 4 exhibitions every year. I'm running the podcast. I'm collaborating with all these other things. I'm teaching. I'm curating independently, and I think that if I tried to make everything perfect, I would have gone insane a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think in the end, you have to lean on people that you know can support you. And again, I think curatorial programs are so focused on the theory, which is good, but we're also forgetting the doing. And business management, project management, all these things are things that we're not being taught. And I can't imagine how I would have pulled anything of the things I've been pulling off without one particular thing. And I'm not sponsored or anything. There's this thing called Code Switch, and they invited me to participate. And it was this consulting training thing. And so I'm trained as a consultant as well. And part of that training includes a lot of project management. And I am so grateful that I have that training, because otherwise I would have been drowning by now. And project management is something that we ignore as curators, and we need to make it visible. We need to make...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Excel is something that I never imagined myself using every day.
Oh, and no. Yeah. All the tabs.
All the tabs, exactly. So Excel, in like all these skills were not mentioned because my master's is in art history and curation. Project management was never covered. People skills were never covered.
I think that's like something interesting, because as someone who is like entering into curation, I came from those background, right? I came from like, marketing. I came from like working as a technician in a theater. I came from like project management for like doing like productions and stuff. So I felt all of the combination of those skills come into this role of the curator, which is definitely insane. It's insanity. It should not, I mean, I don't know if it's... Curators should be paid really well. If this is the role, if this is the thing, y'all need to pay curators really well.
I think there's been 2 things that happened with what you just said. First of all, the word curator has been progressively cheapened, because now everything is curation. Oh, I'm curating a playlist. That's not curation. Oh, I'm curating as an exhibition, but they just choose 4 pictures and hang them on a wall. That's not curation. Curation is so much more.
Yeah.
And in the name of being it's like in Ratatouille with the chef. The chef says everyone can be a chef, right? And the critic gets upset because he's like, not everybody can be a chef. But it's more about the opportunity. Like, everybody should have the opportunity to be a curator. However, not everybody is a curator. And I think we lost that a little bit. Not everybody can be a curator in terms not of access to the skills, but talent and knowledge. And not just you can't just call yourself a curator and be a curator. I think that's the important thing. There's a lot of skills, and you don't have to go to school to have them, but not everybody has the skills necessary to be a curator.
And then within that, it's also, I mean, I completely agree, because even I go to some, well-known museums or galleries here, and I'm like, this was a miss, either because it's from my, colonialist gaze, or on a technical level, why aren't the speakers, loud enough, or why is the sound from this installation bleeding into the other one? Like, is that intentional? conversation or not, and oftentimes it's not, right? So I think like even within that, like when you add like new media, which is also dealing with so much technology, you know, that then also becomes a highly specialized thing. So I do have to agree with you. I've seen far too many. One thing I love about Berlin is the very can-do attitude of like, you know, we can make something happen. You know,
Yeah.
like I have a projector, you have a corridor, a garage, we can do something, right? But then I've seen way too many things which are like, it's cute, you know, but is it meaningful? Is it impactful? You know, that's where
Yeah,
it sometimes falls short.
exactly.
We should really end on a positive note.
Oh no, yeah, definitely. I mean, in the end, the job is fantastic. It's just, I think the misconception is that a curator works with art.
Yeah.
I like we do, but it's like such a small part of it. It's mostly about running something. You're a manager, you're a business person, you're like so many things, and it's a job that it's super challenging, super stressful, but very rewarding, because even when you're like half dead after running around fighting everyone and everything, there's this sense of satisfaction of looking around and saying, I did this. I completed this massive undertaking, even if it's not a massive one, even if it's a small thing, but it's like I put something out into the world that ideally people will see and learn from it, right? I think in the end, yeah, we complain a lot, but we complain not because we hate it, but because we want it to be better.
And I think on it, like I'm think as you were saying that, I was thinking that every time someone came up to me during the event, they'd be like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "I'm like so exhausted," you know, because it would take so much more energy to pretend like I wasn't. But also, I think that honesty is important. It's, you know,
Yeah,
because I don't know also like if there are other students that are interested in curation and whatever, right? Like if you come up to me and you ask me how I'm doing, I will tell you exactly how I am doing, because I think that honesty is important. Like, yes, I'm happy and everything, but I'm also tired, you know, like,
yeah,
and I think we need to see more of that. It was very important for me to have that honesty, because at least, you know, in Sri Lanka, when you do events in Sri Lanka, you make it pristine and perfect, you know, and there's always like that social aspect of like, good morning, like ladies and gentlemen, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't want to be a moderator like that, you know. I'm gonna tell everyone, yo, like, hey, good morning, like thank you for being here today, you know. So bring my own personality when
yeah,
I'm introducing the talks, or when you're asking me how I'm doing or whatever, because all of that personality and that honesty is important. It's not a facade, right? We want to create a space that's open and open for communication, a safer space. And part of also running something like this is making sure that I'm also doing that, that I'm not putting on a facade, that I'm not pretending like everything's fine. If you're asking me, how's everything? I'm like, we just lost power. So we are trying to problem solve, right? All of these things are important to me. And I think one of the main things that I gained also from this was also realizing what kind of starting to build, like we're called manifest IO for like inputs and outputs of a digital technology. But it's also manifest and manifesto, right? So I'm also trying to think like, what is the manifesto of our event, you know? And also what is my own manifesto as an artist? So I think like all of these experiences really help me to define what that is.
yeah. No, definitely. I think that's a really good outlook on things. And I think at the same time, yeah, no, we have to be honest about how we are, how we feel. Are we tired? Are we, because especially when you work with students and they're looking at you. I mean, ideally they look up to you, and if you are always pretending that you're fine, they will emulate you, and then because they don't know how you're coping, or they don't know that you're not actually okay, they have to put up a facade that everything is fine, and then they end up hating it and blah blah blah. So it's very important for us as curators to be very honest about how we feel, how we are, and in the end, nothing bad comes from it. It shows them that you're human. It shows, And it comes through in the exhibitions themselves, in the programs. If you're an honest person, if you're open and friendly, people will want to help you. Maybe not, they won't all be committed, but they will try their best, or at least something, right? And yeah, and sometimes things are not going to work, but no plan survives contact with the enemy, and you have to roll with the punches. And that's the last, I think, from my end, that's the last lesson to curators out there, is no plan survives contact with the enemy. And you cannot assume that everything is going to go great, and you cannot assume that what you do is going to be as planned. It never goes as you planned. It never does, and it never will. And the sooner you accept that, the happier you will be.
I just wrote that down. No plan survives contact with the enemy. I think that may be a good way to end. A good lesson to end on.
Yeah. And I don't know, what do you think? Do you have another one? Do you have a different aphorism or something?
I think for me in my artistic practice, but I think it's true here. I think as long as you do everything with a good intention and with honesty, then it's all gonna be fine. It can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Oh my
Well,
God, it's a little hint of optimism from someone that's not usually an optimist.
oh, I'm an absolute. I'm what I call a cautious pessimist. I expect everything to go wrong, but I hope that everything goes right. So I have plan upon plan.
I think it was like a good podcast today. I hope our listeners also think so, because you and Nadav that talk more on like the technical side and the projection side, and then I kind of transition into more of the emotional lens of it. So hoping it's like a good complementary conversation.
It's a holistic conversation.
It's a holistic conversation. Do you want to say any closing remarks?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on Manifest.io. I think it's a fantastic achievement that you achieved. Redundant. Achievement achieved. And I think that there's so much more coming for you in terms of things, and obviously I would love to work more with you on those kind of things.
Of course.
But yeah, no, and thank you for sharing. And again, I want to thank Nadav, who had to leave to go be with his family, because this is an important thing. Be with your family, with your friends, have time for yourself. And I want to thank all our listeners for taking the time to listen to this very, very long podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.